Good morning, everybody. Ooh, it's nothing like hearing your voice from behind your head. All right, so flow for me is, we're about to see what's going to happen and what's going to come out of my mouth for the next 15 minutes. Selfishly, this just occurred to me that I wake up every morning and I meditate, which this is a newer thing for me, that in order to kind of get present in the room, I thought that maybe we could just take a second to get centered. I need this, so like you're just going to come. We're going to pretend this was part of this talk, and you're going to come along with me. So if everyone can close your eyes just for a minute, we'll do like 4 deep breaths. This is for me, but if it works for you, you're welcome. All right. Cool. Thanks, everybody. All right. So I put a quote up here. Instead of preparing, I like to just have conversations with people. So instead of preparing over the past couple weeks, which I'm pretty sure drove Nicole crazy, I decided that I would just kind of let the world happen to me over the past few weeks and see what came to me as I prepared to speak to you guys this morning. And I was invited in February on a retreat with a bunch of women entrepreneurs that I had been with then to a retreat in October, and I forgot that I even signed up for it or what it was even about. It was last weekend in Alachua County, which is right near Gainesville, and Michael Singer was a huge part of it. I think he's like the godfather of mindfulness or something like that. He's incredible, and if you could visit, he has the Temple of the Universe up there, and it's a really special place. And he really talks about the idea of kind of the thought behind this quote. In order to be who you are, you must be willing to let go of who you think you are. And this has really been, a guiding thing for me that I'm a big control person, as I imagine many of you are here. Anybody who, I guess anyone who's human probably likes some version of control. And so when I started to think about, what does flow mean to me, the words started popping in my head, things like intuition and instinct and mindfulness. And it really comes down to the idea for me that the closer I can come to paying attention to what's happening in my body and really getting calm and getting present with what's going on, the more that I can, can kind of, I guess, let go of control. And so what I want to share with you guys today is a couple of just pieces from my story. I'll try to keep it on the shorter end so we can leave more time for Q&A. For me, these kinds of talks, I prefer conversations in general. I said maybe I'll just sit in this chair and talk to some of my friends that are here, that you all can listen and it'll feel more, natural, I guess. But, whenever talks are given like this, I'm always cautious when I'm paying attention that everybody's experience and stories are told in hindsight. So it sounds like I have it all figured out. I didn't know any of this while it was happening, so just keep that in mind, that these are all like, as I was thinking over the past couple of weeks of what I took away from these things, but I did not know any of these things were going to happen, and I didn't plan for any of these things to happen along the way. So that's always my cautionary tale when I read a personal growth book or a business book, to not walk away and make a checklist of what that person did because it was them telling their success story in hindsight. And this is not all a success story, spoiler alert. So to kind of just get back to my, kind of centering on the idea of flow is, the tricky thing for it is in order to achieve it, you have to let go of control. So it's this weird cycle. So here we go. Nicole, maybe 3 slides. It says part 1, part 2, and part 3. So I had to figure out what those 3 parts were going to be. So here we go. So part 1, I am a local girl as well. I was born and raised in Wellington. I do not ride horses. That's always everyone's next question. I also grew up in the Aero Club, and we did not have a plane. My parents moved up from Fort Lauderdale in 1979 to get away from the hustle and bustle of what was developing down there. When they came to Wellington, there was 441 was a 2-way road. There was no hospitals, no high schools, no anything. Gabby and I grew up in Wellington. It was like there was like 30 people there, and so what it is now is really fun now that I'm back to see it. But it's been a funny evolution watching Wellington Evolve. It's a beautiful place if you guys haven't had a chance to get out there, and especially during the equestrian season. It's a really special place in our backyard. I was a total homebody. So I guess part one is like the beginning of Jess. I was a total homebody. My brother joked for my entire childhood that I would live with my parents. And he said in the attic, which we didn't have an attic, so I don't know where he thought I was going to live, like I was a troll. I followed my brother everywhere, which he hated. He went to Cardinal Newman, and I, like every good Jewish girl, my grandmother was thrilled, followed him to Cardinal Newman, which is right down the street here. I don't know if there's any Newman alum in the room. Anyone? No? I usually get a lot of like, woo-woo. Anyways. Oh, yeah, I'm Nate. I brought my one Newman alumni friend. And then I followed him again to the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. Oh, is there Osprey? Swoop. That never happens. If I would have said like UF, I would have gotten a whole bunch of cheers. My entire life, I guess, I remember being young, and they would call it, I guess, manifestation now. I don't know, there's all these like terms for things now. I always remember people saying I was so lucky. Like I, would get the first parking spot in the parking lot. I would, be traveling with friends and I'd get upgraded for like no apparent reason. I would get picked for the team or whatever. And I wasn't, it was in my mind, I always couldn't understand why people would say you were lucky. Because I just thought, well, why not? I don't know. I think positively, and I think I'm a good person, and I work hard. And I just think that was what happened in the world. Why wouldn't you get the first parking spot, or why wouldn't you? It never occurred to me that this was something, and I was always really confused. I paid a lot of attention to that. If I'm thinking back, and I have a horrible memory, but when I think back, that was something that always stood out in my mind, is people saying, this idea of like, you're so lucky, and not understanding why they weren't just living that way too. I went to the University of North Florida, and I remember, you would come back like every weekend. I also stayed with my high school boyfriend, and then so it took me a couple years to really get into the groove of college. But I remember one of my childhood friends, who actually got married in this beautiful theater. She was a bigger homebody than I was, as far as I was concerned. She was the only child and lived down the street from me, and she studied abroad in college. And I remember thinking, like, gosh, if Ashley could study abroad and could leave her parents for like an entire summer, like, God, could you imagine? That I could do that. And so I studied abroad in college, and I would say this is probably like the first life-changing experience that I had. I remember looking out the window of the plane as it was landing. I went to Florence, so I think we landed in Rome. I remember looking out the window, and this is a very distinct memory in my like really crappy memory bank of not remembering anything, that I remember looking out the window, like very specifically, and seeing Rome, I guess, at the time, Italy, and thinking like, wow, there's a whole other world out there. Like this is a land I've never seen before, and there's people that live in this world that I imagine are going to speak a different language, and they're going to have a totally different culture. And I spent a summer there, and then immediately regretted that I only did a summer and not a semester or an entire year or the rest of my life in Italy. And I'm working on that. And it just changed my perspective of a couple of things. One is how big the world was, but maybe more importantly, how small each of us are, and not in an insignificant way, like, oh, we're not good enough for this, but really just the fact that our problems, our experiences, everything that we kind of, the ego, I guess you could say, it really kind of shrunk that for me. It gave me perspective of the fact that there's so much that you don't know in this world. And it made me really excited about a lifelong journey of experiencing that, as well as kind of change my perspective of where I saw my place in the world and how I wanted to always be kind of reaching out. I always thought growing up this was a really worldly place, because it is. We have people from all over the world that come and visit here, and that really kind of put me in my place, and it changed the trajectory of my life. I had my mom was born in New York, my grandmother was born in New York, and when I was 16, my mom and grandma brought me there to visit for the first time, and I remember thinking what a magical place it was. And after I studied abroad, I thought, like, this is where I started to set my, like, where are cities that you can live that kind of put you in a place where you're going to be exposed to that. And so I just started running my mouth about how I was going to move to New York, and if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I'm sure that song, well, I guess that song hadn't come out yet, but I really started to kind of think about, like, where am I going to start to put myself to to get myself in places where I'm able to kind of elevate my experience, my exposure. In my mind, it was all professional because you go to college and I guess everyone starts asking you what you're going to do. I mean, they start asking you when you're, 5, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? I think everybody here would say, like, whatever age you are, I'm 35, I still don't know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But I remember thinking, like, I'm going to do it in New York, because if you can do it in New York, then that's like the pinnacle. And so I ran my mouth so long that by the time I was graduated from UNF, people were like, cool, so when are you going to New York? And I was like, oh shit, now I got to go. Like, I guess I said it so much that now they think I'm going. And so I had my plans to go there. And in my mind, which is bizarre, I don't know where this came from, I wanted to be a movie premiere event planner, very specific. I don't watch movies. I'm not a movie person. Like, I love Friends. I like watching TV. And so I remember, like, it was a family that I was babysitting for in college said, we're going to take you for your college graduation present to Los Angeles, and we'll introduce you to some people that are in that business. And I went out to meet with a couple different, oh, cool, all right. Well, I got to really get a move on here. Met with a couple different movie studios to understand what that was like. And this woman told me from, I think it was Fox Searchlight, she said, listen, you clearly have no idea what you want to do. You're 21, you made up this job that you think existed, and you don't even watch movies. And so why don't you go to New York, get a job there, get your feet wet, get grounded, come back in a few years when you kind of have a little better sense of, like, who you are and what you want to do, because this is a really hard business out here, and then see if you still want to do that. And then it, like, exited my mind. I moved to New York. Let's see what happens next. Okay, here we go. I moved to New York. I got a job in production because I thought it'd be really glamorous and sexy, although I was told otherwise by people, but I was 21, so I knew everything. I got a job in production on the World Series of Pop Culture on VH1, if anyone ever remembers that show. It was very exciting. I worked in casting. So I'm like 21 years old, traveling all over the country, casting people who are know the most about pop culture in the world, which was really fun. And then quickly after that realized that I wanted something that was more business focused. And so I moved into what is called media buying. I didn't know what that was. It's under the advertising umbrella. And basically what I did for the next, I guess, 7 years was I negotiated the commercial and integration. So basically all of the national brands or global brands that I worked for, Home Depot was probably my biggest client at the time. Anytime you saw a Home Depot commercial or College Game Day on ESPN or an integration into HGTV show, I negotiated all of that. That was really fun. I love negotiating. I learned. I got good at it over the years. And it was an opportunity to be really exposed to a lot of New York. I was making no money. I couldn't afford it. On the weekends, I couldn't afford to leave my apartment. But during the weekdays, I was like a baller. We had expense accounts. And so somebody's nodding their head here because you must have done that. You're like, yes, it was the greatest life ever. They called it, New York Times wrote an article called The Poverty Elite. Because during the week, you're like on a yacht in the Hudson River or like front row at Yankee Stadium, and then on the weekend, you're like eating ramen noodles. So in my mind, fastest best, I need to get every promotion. Who did it? How young were they? How quick did they do it? I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do it faster. So this was my mentality. I really got to get a move on here. And in my mind, I said, well, what does that look like? Well, it's CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, by 30. That's what I decided. That would mean if I did that, then I was the best. I got there the fastest. And so I set my sights on that. And then, ironically, I get a call. We lost the Home Depot account. My boss moved to Los Angeles to run that office. He called me about a month later, and he said, hey, we have Lionsgate Movie Studio. They just bought the rights to the Hunger Games. And they're going to now go from being like Tyler Perry movies and the Saw franchise to becoming a really like big-time studio. We need somebody who can negotiate significant amounts of money from New York to come in and run this account. Which meant that I was moving to Los Angeles 6 years after that conversation with that woman at Fox Searchlight to work on a movie studio, which was really funny because I never, totally left my mind after that conversation 6 years prior. And I remember getting on the plane, and I said, and this is so weird, I never do this. This is so weird, and I would never remember this, but I remember saying out loud as I'm stepping onto the plane, I was going to say Delta because that's my airline, but I don't think it might have been JetBlue. And saying out loud, this is going to be awesome as long as nothing bad happens, which is like so weird. And so, it's dark, premonition, I guess. So, I moved there, and it was awesome. And LA is awesome. If anyone hasn't been, go. It's amazing. And 6 months into living there, I got a call from my brother that my dad had taken his own life. And it was there, and because I probably ran out of time already. Nicole's giving me a look. I won't get into all the details, but if you've heard me speak at other events, I speak a lot about mental health, so you can kind of hear the full story. But he had gotten sick, and in a period of maybe 2 months, us scrambling to try to figure out how to help him, we obviously could not. And at that moment, there was this like total shift in my life of, I guess the biggest thing was perspective. It was almost instantly like this filter came over me that allowed me to, like, anything that wasn't important, I had no energy for it. Like, I had no capacity. I was like barely surviving. And so anything that wasn't like feeding me and feeding my soul, I don't even know if I had a soul at that point. I don't know what I had, but anything, it was just like, and all of a sudden everything seemed ridiculous. I remember I flew back to Los Angeles. I was here for a few weeks, had to move my mom out of my parents' home, obviously had to deal with all of that. I came back to Los Angeles the morning of the Hunger Games premiere, which was like, prior to this was the thing. We had worked on this movie for, a year, or I guess 6 months, and I walked into walked the red carpet, walked into this thing that I had been looking forward to for so long, and I felt as if I was floating outside of my body. Like, I remember watching myself. I remember the bar we went to beforehand. I remember the red carpet. I remember sitting next to Donald Sutherland, like the whole thing, and I remember watching observing myself and being like, there's kids here. What am I doing here? Like, what is happening in my life? And it started to change my perspective pretty dramatically. I also lost very quickly that ability to manifest. So this thing that everyone called me lucky for my whole life, that I never understood what it was, I was in such a negative, dark place that all the things that people kept saying to me that they were happening to them that I never understood, like I would stub my toe. I got rear-ended. I wouldn't even find a parking spot, like let alone the front one. I'd get accidentally kicked off the flight to the back seat or whatever, like everything that I understood, because I lost my ability to think positively. I got out of, I guess what you would call, maybe call the flow. And then the irony is I moved back to New York. I guess in retrospect, maybe because everyone kept saying, you're going to move back to New York, right? Like, you're not going to stay out in LA after all of this that happened. My grandfather also passed away 2 months later, and so I was back to Florida constantly. And so I said, yeah, of course I'm going to move back. And so I got back to New York, and I basically, I guess maybe for in order to not have to deal with everything that happened with my dad, again, not consciously, and this is hindsight, I put my head down and had then the 2 most successful years of my career, I guess by whatever that means, by, public measure. I was nominated Rising Star of the Advertising Industry. I was asked to speak at conferences all around the country on behalf of the advertising industry. I moved into a role called Content Innovation, which meant that I was connecting our brands, Hyundai Kia, Miller Coors, USAA was one of my big clients, with technology companies and startups, working with VCs and incubators all over the country, as well as content creators, going straight to the content creators. And this was my job, and it was exciting. In theory, as far as social media is concerned, I had it all. And I realized that it was, in hindsight, this was all at the expense of me dealing with what was really going on. Here we go, part 3, with a minute to spare. I woke up one day, I guess, probably on the eve of my 30th birthday, and right at the point where maybe the night before, a couple nights before, somebody from another movie studio had taken me out for drinks to talk about that I was ready to be a CMO. He said, here's your time. Your time has come. We're going to start putting you in positions to interview for these jobs. And so this thing, when I was 21, that I set out to do in New York City was now put in front of me. And I remember thinking, I don't want any of this. None of this. And it was this weird, it happened overnight. I woke up the next morning. I said, I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lost myself completely. I don't leave my apartment on the weekends. I remember thinking, what my dad did, that seemed so unfathomable years before, now didn't seem so unfathomable. I could understand how somebody who lived like that for so long could get to that place. And I woke up and I was like, I got to go. I got to get out of here. All of this stuff doesn't mean anything anymore. And I've done all of this at the expense of myself. And so I moved back to Florida, like Nicole said. It's like, oh, yeah. Well, and I felt that way. I moved back 5 years ago. I live across the street. I walked here. And West Palm was 5 years ago. So if anyone's been here for 5 years, I thought, holy crap, who am I going to socialize with? All of my friends that were still here were like, married with kids. A lot of them were stay-at-home moms. I thought, how in the world am I going to have a social life? I believe I still want a career. I don't know. And what I did, though, was I got back to who I am as a person. My family owns a fitness and wellness center out in Wellington, Ultima. And I started helping my mom run that business because she'd been doing it by herself, which meant I had a free personal trainer, and I worked in a gym. And so I just basically worked out all the time and started focusing on, like, how am I going to do this meditation thing? How am I going to start to get my brain back to a better place? And the interesting thing is if I look back at like experiences and amazing things that happened to me and how the world opened up to me, and if I think about like all the possibilities that have existed, the most condensed period that has happened to me is after the most traumatic thing and after the time when I kind of gave up and I kind of lost the energy to be able to control things. The past 5 years of my life have been bananas. I reconnected, have my cheering committee over here. I joined a professionals group in Wellington, which in order to like make some friends, and I reconnected with a childhood friend who now is a great friend again, and we worked together. And then I met my business partner Dan, who had moved here with his son and wife from Chicago. I became an entrepreneur. We joke that I got shoved off the entrepreneurial cliff because one day Dan said we had our businesses, we signed the legal paperwork, and then I stopped getting paid. And he's like, well, now you're an entrepreneur. And so we launched a security token, which is on blockchain technology. If anyone's interested, we could talk later, but talk to Dan because he knows more. I didn't even know what a security was. It's just an equity share in a business. If you didn't know, I didn't know that. I joined Entrepreneurs Organization and am now part of a global entrepreneurs group and get to meet and talk with and hang out with regularly amazing entrepreneurs from all over the world. I've got to speak at the UN because of that. I did a TED Talk last month, which was on my bucket list forever. I have traveled more and loved more and laughed more and lived more than I ever have in my entire life after what I would think would have been an unfathomable thing to come back from. And when I stopped caring and putting in my mind what was going to happen and what I was going to do and controlling everything. And that's the experience I wanted to share with you guys. So thank you all for having me.